Awesome. Thank you for joining, everyone. Thank you for joining the LPP team. And this is our monthly live webinar. And this month we have titled this session an overview of LPP's policy initiatives, right? So often folks are asking us questions. What are we doing? How can you help? How can I get involved with LPP? And so hopefully we will be able to answer some of those questions, and so that you know what we are doing and how important your support is. So thank you to stay in touch with us. These webinars are happening monthly, so sign up for our newsletter at lastprisonerproject.org, and you will get updates on the recordings, and the recordings will be posted on YouTube if you want to share this information with your network. So again, thank you for joining. It's a Friday, so I will not keep up much of your time, and so I'll just jump straight in. One more housekeeping. If you have questions, I will be monitoring the chat. Please feel free to chat with us there. For ease, though, if you have a question that you would like to have answered live, please drop that into the Q&A portion, and I will monitor those and we will answer them as they fit into the conversation. And then we will also save some time at the end of this session to answer some of your questions. So thank you. And so to jump right in, we'll start with introductions of the LPP team. My name is Evelyn LaChapelle, and I am the re-entry coordinator here at Last Prisoner Project, as well as coordinating these webinar sessions for our network of supporters. And then I would like to go clockwise, but I'm assuming that everyone's screen maybe looks different. So I will start with you, Gracie, if you could introduce yourself.
Thanks, Evelyn. Hi, everyone. My name is Gracie Berger, and I am the State Policy Director at LPP, which means that I oversee our policy work at the state and local level in jurisdictions around the country. And I'll let my colleague Adrian introduce himself next.
Thanks, Gracie, and thanks, Evelyn, for putting this panel together. Really appreciate it. Thanks, y'all. My name is Adrian Rocha. I'm the Senior Policy Associate with Last Prisoner Project. I stay in New Orleans. As Gracie said, I work on the policy team and try and help figure out how we can move towards the decriminalization and legalization of cannabis. And I'll pass it over to Natalie.
Hi, thanks for joining us this Friday afternoon. I'm Natalie Papillon. I'm LPP's Director of Strategic Initiatives. In that role, I oversee a lot of our federal work as well as some of our issue-based advocacy campaigns. And with that, I will pass it on to Dante West.
Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Excuse my screen as soon as my Wi-Fi comes in. Hopefully I can hop on this video, but I'm a legacy fellow at the Last Prisoner Projects. I do speaking initiatives, help out with policy, and just dive in and help free all the prisoners out there for cannabis. And also we try to capture the moments when people are released from prison.
Thank you. And I'd also like to point out that we are spanning across the country, and that is because this is an issue that is far-reaching in this country, and it just highlights how these issues, this social justice issue, the 40,000 folks who are still incarcerated for this plant, is a far-reaching problem. We had New Orleans. Natalie, you're in Atlanta.
I'm in Brooklyn. Oh. I'm in Brooklyn. So apologies for the construction and people screaming at each other outside my windows, the sound of the city.
So we've got Brooklyn and Gracie.
Yeah, I'm outside of Boston in Somerville, Mass.
And Dante?
I'm right here in Kansas City, Missouri, but from California, Stockton.
And I am here in Oakland, California. And so that just lets you know that there are folks around this country who are really pushing to solve the issues at hand. And so I'll get started with you, Natalie and Gracie. Can you tell us what is the overreaching goal of LPP's policy team?
Yeah, I'll do something super high level because I know Gracie's going to get into the nitty gritty. My colleagues are very sick of me saying this, but at a high level, our policy goal is to put ourselves out of business. And that means not only advancing legislation that ends the criminalization of cannabis, whether that's on the local, state, and federal level and potentially internationally in the future. But it's also making sure that people who have been burdened by, cannabis-related law enforcement practices, incarceration, arrest, whatnot, are no longer stifled from opportunity because of those previous cannabis-related encounters. So that means making sure people, get retroactive relief that allows access to gainful employment, access to educational opportunities, access to familial visitation. The war on drugs, and specifically the war on cannabis, really has tentacles in every element of American society. And we're trying to sort of, Johnny Depp and Pirates of the Caribbean style, chop off all those tentacles to make sure it's no longer used as a premise for these really, really negative consequences across the nation.
Gotta love a Pirates of the Caribbean metaphor. Yeah, so just to piggyback off of Natalie, the goal of our team is to achieve as close to full freedom as possible for everyone criminalized by cannabis. Of course, acknowledging that the true amount of the harm done by this war on drugs, by this war on people, can never be fully undone. But, the way to get as close to full freedom as possible in LPP's mind is to advocate for public policies that retroactively provide meaningful and accessible relief to people who are still incarcerated, and to all of those many, many more around the country that are still harnessed to, the life sentence, really, of having a criminal record for cannabis. So, in operation, that looks a little bit different depending on where you live and where your state or county is along kind of its process with prohibition. So if you're, somewhere in a state or county that has not legalized yet, you're still in a prohibition state, we add our voice to ensure that really strong retroactive relief provisions are being added to the legalization efforts, because there is a legalization effort in some form or fashion in every state around the country as momentum is growing. So really ensuring that those provisions are in those efforts. So once legalization happens, the people that were harmed are actually included in that effort. And then for states that have legalized, but haven't provided retroactive relief, of which there are many, unfortunately, we advocate, for the adoption of those states to add retroactive relief to their legalization programs, and to effectively implement them, which is something we'll talk more about a little bit later today. So it's not enough to legalize, I think, is the thing to remember here. The harm done has to be repaired as much as possible, especially when the government has acknowledged its mistake of prohibition, right? So it's not enough to create a new market. And that's really what we believe here at LPP.
It is absolutely not enough. I am still surprised that states would legalize and not think about, or acknowledge that the folks are still in prison. And I think that is the largest misconception in how this problem continues to exist, is that folks assume in many legal states that there must not be anyone currently incarcerated. I also love, Natalie, the idea of putting ourselves out of business, right? Like that is the end goal. And I don't think I've heard it yet like that. And so I love that. And so know that when you are supporting Last Prison Project, it is really to put us out of business. We are not looking to have another or leave anyone in prison behind this plant. So thank you both for that. For the fellas, Adrian and Dante, in this conversation, what are the top priorities, the current top priorities of the LPP's policy team? And I'll start with you, Adrian.
Thanks, Evelyn. Yeah, I really just want to reiterate something that everybody on this call just said, and I'm sure we're in agreement there, which is, one of the sort of prevailing issues and things that we try to address through the priorities at LPP's policy team is, the idea that justice doesn't start with legalization, or doesn't end with legalization, right? In many states, it's actually just the starting point, right? So what does it start to look like to sort of undo the criminalization of cannabis, right? So for us right now, it sort of falls largely into two buckets as we've been thinking about them, which is release. So those are your methods for resentencing, clemency, and parole. And, you know, I do want to note here that we do provide, we have a team that provides direct service programs that work to both release nonviolent cannabis offenders from incarceration and assist those coming out of incarceration in the effort to rebuild their lives as they get going post release. But in terms of policy, our goal is to kind of look across the country at these individuals that we're helping and address the root cause of that individual's incarceration, right? So what sort of policy levers can we pull to shut that path down in the criminalization of cannabis, right? So that we ensure that this individual isn't a repeat in the system, right? So we're not seeing the same sort of thing over and over again. And so that looks like differently in a bunch of different states. As Gracie noted, the sort of landscape for this is very different depending on what state you look in. And it's also different at the federal level. And I'm sure Natalie will be able to talk to that in a little bit. The sort of other big bucket that we've been focusing on is reentry. So one of the things that we know, and Gracie noted, is the overcriminalization of cannabis really does cast a long shadow on individuals, right? So in most states, even interactions that don't lead to a conviction, right? So maybe you had some sort of interaction with a law enforcement official, it ended up in you getting booked in some way, but the judge ultimately doesn't decide to convict you. That can still follow you. And it can follow you for the rest of your life, right? Unless you're taking active steps to sort of address that criminal record. And the research here is very clear. Record clearance policies have a ton of benefits that we should all be invested in, right? So it's pretty consistent, 13% increase in employment, 25% wage increase over 2 years, right? So we're talking about benefits that make a real difference in someone's life, especially when you're considering, when you do have that criminal record, there are so many paths that get shut down for you right away, right? So you can't apply for food stamps, you can't apply for Pell Grants. In some instances, it'll prevent housing for individuals. So we really are trying to close that gap between who's eligible for this type of relief and who's actually receiving that type of relief. And so to that end, one of the policies that we've been intimately involved with is automated record clearance. So the idea that the individual who is seeking to have that criminal record, again, maybe even for a non-conviction cleared, doesn't have to go through the process of filing a petition, potentially hiring an attorney, making court visits, right? This is a thing that LPP feels strongly should just be done automatically, right? There's a certain period where that individual should no longer have to pay the price for, in some states, something that's not even deemed illegal anymore. So we're really excited about that work, and I'm sure Gracie can talk into more specifics at it, but for now, I'll pass it to Dante.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Before you jump in, I just wanted to add that as someone incarcerated, right, like our eyes are a little different. And so as a formerly incarcerated fellow for this plant, think about LPP's policy and what's like top priority for you as someone who has been incarcerated.
Yeah, I mean, just being incarcerated, I remember just recently being released, and you know, the first part of me was I couldn't go apply. You know, my case was still pending because I got my conviction overturned. But I was educating the DA like, hey, if you stick this felony on my record, I won't be able to have a loan. I can't apply for a loan. I'm gonna have to move back into, you know, the housing that I don't want to live in. I'm just set up with so many disadvantages. And he told me, he said, the district attorney told me and said, I didn't know how much a felony affected the African-American community. And that's because the policies are so outdated. No one really dives into the nitty gritty of, you know, what's affecting the prisoners, because we're the last thing on someone's mind. So we're just trying to understanding the perspective on why unfair state and federal policy was implemented, right? It's kind of getting in at the core and figuring out the why, because what was wrong a long time ago isn't what's wrong now. And, you know, whatever the case may be. So we just kind of want to make sure that we're addressing the weaknesses in each policy. Like if something in the policy really says that it can be changed, or we can figure out a way to adopt things from other states that are doing things real well, then we'll dive into that and we'll use that to our advantage. And we've been pretty successful at that. And we definitely want to bring these policies up to date. You know, if just for instance, to talk about Kansas, the drug grid hasn't been changed since the 90s, you know, so I just can only imagine with the post-release for offense like that is. So, you know, as times change, I think things need to change too. And I think we need to help drag people along, because if that district attorney was educated he probably would have dove in and supported through his county to kind of differ away from the policy. You know, I would assume, right? And then also it's key to work with these key lawmakers on the federal and state level and show them the policy, and hopefully they can expedite these policies through like experience, right? Some people are not willing to change a policy or even make a law until they find out something like, wow, this is a game breaker. This is something that we really need to look at. This is something we really need to change. And sometimes it takes a story. Sometimes it takes a dramatic shift in culture.
Yep. You got it. I think that's where we are in 2021. It takes a story and a shift in culture. And that is just the world that we live in of media, right? Media really monitors and shifts the way that this country or this world is operating. So thank you for that, Dante. So diving in, because policy is not just a local, state, or federal, like it's a federal issue as well. It expands across all government branches, which really makes this an issue, not an easy one to tackle, right? This is not something you could just go ask your senator for. It literally will need to make it to the White House. And so to speak to that on all levels, I will start with Natalie. How does LPP engage at the federal level on policy? And can you share a recent example and how folks can get involved federally?
Of course. So Evelyn, when you mentioned sort of how media can shift the narrative and shift culture and shift policy, it led me to think about federal clemency. So for those who don't know, clemency is an absolute power nested within, a jurisdiction's authority. So for the federal government, it's with the President of the United States, President Biden currently, and on the state level, it tends to be nested within the office of the governor or the governor, and that's generally the case. And this power allows these executives to either commute someone's sentence, which at a high level means shorten it, or pardon someone's offense and sort of effectively nullifying that. And I know there's been a lot of discussion in the national media around, certain clemency decisions made over the past year or so, and it's really been getting a lot of traction, especially because President Biden and his administration has decided to issue or try and expedite some clemency grants for people who are currently on home confinement right now due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things, that we do as an organization, our direct services legal team does as an organization, is really manage the clemency filing and petitioning process. So we do the individual case management, we help supplement or create clemency petitions for individuals, which are then reviewed by boards and executives and whatnot, and hopefully get that signature so someone's granted relief. But what we also are doing on the policy side is advocating for a way of issuing, mass commutations or mass pardons in a more effective manner. So you can imagine it takes years and years and years to go through this process of potentially getting your clemency petition approved and President Biden's signature on it. But there are some legal mechanisms that have historical precedent. Other presidents have done this and actually done it quite effectively, where President Biden could sort of issue a pretty mass clemency grant to certain categories of folks. And so we have a campaign that's been running since the beginning of the year and amping back up now that clemency is once again in the air, that would allow President Biden to really efficiently, so we're saying a year or less, process commutations for people who are currently incarcerated for nonviolent marijuana-related convictions, and also, that would have a tremendous impact on lowering, of course, our federal prison population, but also setting an example for other authorities. So we know that the most cannabis convictions are actually happening on the state level. When you see the President of the United States do something, governors, for example, now feel like they have the power and the opportunity and the narrative and the media surrounding it to support similar action within their jurisdiction. So a really easy way to show your support for that federal clemency campaign is by going to lastprisonerproject.org/take-action. You can just add your name to the petition application. I know it sounds like it's super easy, should take no more than 2 minutes, but the more the federal government, and especially President Biden's administration, knows that people want this, the more likely they are to really try and tackle this issue. And then the other thing, circling back to the media narrative, is that a lot of people, and we see this day in and day out, do not know that people are still incarcerated for cannabis. Like, there is a fundamental misunderstanding with lay people. They assume, yeah, that happened in the 90s, reformatus, whatever, but the problem's over. Obviously, the problem is not just over, it's particularly acute. And so we need you all to sort of educate your local communities at this issue and advocate for solutions like clemency or like expungement or like resentencing. And a really easy way to do that is by publishing an op-ed in your local paper, right? Or asking someone in community who might have a way with words to do that. So one of the things I encourage people who, you know, like to write, like to sort of be out in public, is publish a letter to the editor. Publish an op-ed. If you go to your local paper, there's normally a editor to get in touch with. You can go on our website. We have a ton of resources for informing that argument. And it's quite gratifying to see your name in print or online, of course. And of course, it also shifts that narrative and elevates the conversation. So your average person understands that this is an issue that their elected officials need to work to rectify.
I was on mute. That's a great idea. I had to take a note, like publish a letter to the editor. The petitions are absolutely important. I've seen petitions really make it to the White House for good change. And so, yes, please take the 2 minutes to sign that petition. But I love this new idea of publishing a letter to the editor. Thank you, Natalie. And so, Gracie, I have the same question for you, but at a state level. What are recent examples of policy change? How can folks get involved at the state level, and how can you update us on that?
Yeah, so just at a high level, kind of what our state policy work looks like is, you know, providing direct technical assistance and advocacy to decision makers, to advocates, to other key stakeholders in states and in local jurisdictions. And, you know, we want to be dealing with all branches of government. So those look like strategies with, you know, the legislature, with the executive branch, and with the courts. And what we're pushing for is evidence-based policies that are providing release and supported reentry, particularly automatic record clearance for everyone criminalized by prohibition. So what that looks like a little bit more specifically is making sure that there's laws on the books that provide release levers that are compulsory to get people out. So there's a lot of discretion in criminal justice policies everywhere, anywhere that you look. There's a lot of discretion given to the people that put them behind bars in the first place, namely prosecutors and judges. And so we're pushing for policies that are based in research and also based in legalization. The government admitting that it made a mistake in putting that person behind bars. We're looking for policies that compel the government's hands to open the doors for people that have been criminalized. And we're looking for deadlines, and we're looking for process. We're looking for details that say, this is when the state is going to do what it says it's going to do. Because a lot of laws, far too many laws that have ruined lives, say that the state can do something if it feels like it someday, maybe. And those are useless laws. That's government that doesn't work. And the government is supposed to work for people. So we're looking for compulsory policies. We're looking for reduced discretion of those stakeholders, and we're looking for, you know, automatic record clearance for people who have erroneous records in the growing number of states where the decision has been made. The government has admitted we messed up. We shouldn't have criminalized this. So now people have these erroneous records. I live in Massachusetts. We've had legalization for years. There's no automatic record clearance here. So people are still walking around with those records around their necks. Why? You know, the state has said we made a mistake. So that's what we're looking for at the state and local level. And we're also providing oversight, and another word for that is watchdogging. So it's not just support that we give to get things passed at the legislative level, but also at the implementation stage. We provide support to ensure that people who, the people that wrote the law intended to benefit actually get the benefit. And that sounds super obvious and is unfortunately not the case in a lot of places. So just an example of our work as it relates to that particular strategy, it's really only half the battle to pass a reform. It feels like the full battle when you're in it. It's really hard to pass laws, but then one passes and it's on the books, and it has to be put to life. That law has to be put to work. And so there's a bunch of people that are charged with putting that law to work. Criminal justice laws like resentencing and expungement laws deal with a lot of people and a lot of players and a lot of different agencies that don't naturally or happily talk to each other or even have the means to do that. There's a lot of data involved, and a lot of people have to do things that maybe is not their normal business process. So it's really not as simple as saying it's the black letter of the law, snap your fingers, go do it. And that's where LPP comes in to really, provide support there. And so an example in California is a few years ago in 2018, a law was passed to provide automatic marijuana specific record clearance for people who had, now erroneous because it's a legalization state, low level cannabis convictions. And that's a great law, but unfortunately, when you look across the state, it hasn't been fully implemented everywhere. Those records have not automatically come off people's records. They're still being bounced back on background checks. They're still having to check no when they go apply for housing, or yes, rather, that they have a conviction. So we're supporting that effort on the ground to figure out, what's going wrong, what are the barriers, and how can we fix that. So that's just an example. There's a lot of other places where similar kind of things are happening around the country at both the local and state level. And so a way to get involved is to definitely follow us on social media and get our newsletter we'll share out updates of things that are happening, but also stay up to date on what's happening in your county or your state, or just go right now and Google and find out what is happening specifically with expungement, with release as it relates to people in your area who are criminalized by cannabis. Try to see if you can find some articles about what local leaders are doing, and then call them up. Do not underestimate the ability of yourself to make a change. It's actually true that legislators, elected officials will come into meetings where they have to vote or negotiate on a bill, and they'll say, I was going to go one way on this, but I've just gotten these letters from people, in my county. So really don't underestimate your ability to change your officials. They're your officials. They're there to work for you. So if you don't see your state or county going in the right direction on expungement or resentencing, if they're not doing anything or they're going the wrong direction, call them up, write them a letter, send them an email, tweet at them, and tell them that you want to see automatic expungement. Tell them that you want to see releases, and that's a great way to get involved.
Thank you. That reminded me of what Dante just said about our officials like changing their mind, and it's a lack of education, right? Like Dante had to speak to him to verbalize what that felon would do, right, to his future. And if you are not in that space, if that is not your community, then we can give them a pass, but it is our job to inform them, right? Like that's our job. We've elected you. You are here to serve us as your constituents. And so we all have a duty to make sure that our leaders are informed about the issues that we are concerned about. So I love that idea. And then Adrian, on a local level, especially being in New Orleans, and I don't know if you're going to speak to this, but I have, my family is there. And so I know that where you're at has historically been really harsh on drugs, right? I have someone that I spent in time with a constituent of ours who received 15 years for minor involvement down there on the federal level. And so on local level, on policy, the same question as I have for Gracie and Natalie: what's going on and how can folks get involved, and how is LPP involved locally?
Yeah, it's a great question, Evelyn. And I didn't know that your family was here. I hope I can meet up with them. We can go get some Yakamane or something. That'd be terrific. But, you know, to your point, it's a significant and consistent issue here in Louisiana, right? Like, if you've never been to Louisiana, you probably think of New Orleans, right? And you probably think about the wonderful, rich cultural place that it is, right? Lots of jazz music, lots of food. The truth is, too, Louisiana also has one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. It is the highest in the country. And when you start to look at sort of what is driving that number, right? There's been recent reports and research that shows about 80% of new arrests that were made in 2018 were for marijuana convictions, right? So, you know, one of the things that I think is particularly unique and what I really appreciate about LPP is I think back to, you know, like when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, my teacher had explained sort of the layers of government as a layer cake. So you have like the federal government on top, and then the state government in the middle, and then your local government right there at the bottom, right? And to keep with that analogy, right, like LPP's taking a bite out of all 3 of those levels, right? So we are engaged at a local level, and that looked like here in New Orleans when the city council was starting to discuss a little known power, but does exist, to pardon individuals who had any offenses. So if, in effect, nullify any sort of arrest that dealt with marijuana. We engaged with city council to provide some sort of, through local groups, to provide feedback on that bill. And what ended up happening is that that ordinance was, an amendment was added to that ordinance to ensure that it also covered drug paraphernalia. So what that ended up looking like in practice is that New Orleans is on the verge of issuing about 15,000 retroactive pardons for individuals who had been caught with simple possession of marijuana or have paraphernalia on them at the time of the arrest, right? But to Gracie's point, right, like some of the work only starts when a bill or a piece of ordinance goes and is signed, right? Like we have to stay with individuals to make sure the letter of the law and the spirit of the law is actually followed through with and being implemented with fidelity, right? So because I have the good fortune of being here in New Orleans, working with local groups and city council to ensure that that pardon takes the effect that it's supposed to have, and people can get the relief that they're entitled to now under that letter of the law, right? So to use Gracie's term, right, watchdogging the process to ensure that what was intended is what actually is effectuated. And that's how, you know, we as LPP are involved in New Orleans, but that also means that tons of individuals are involved throughout the process, right? So whether or not you're sending an email from the lastprisonerproject.com, local elected officials still stand for election, right? Which means they are accountable to citizens in various ways. So engaging with them in a regular and direct way, the simple of which is voting every year, right? Like if you have the ability to vote, you should absolutely use that ability to reflect the values and make sure the city council reflects the values that you have, right? Because it can lead to a certain thing like New Orleans or your local city pushing for some sort of level of decriminalization on an individual level, right? So I'm from Texas originally. I'm thinking about my home city of El Paso, who decriminalized marijuana a couple years ago, and my where I went, just outside of where I went to college, San Marcos, Texas, which is currently considering decriminalizing marijuana, right? There's room in those coalitions to become a member at a local level, right? And we also want to think a little bit broader than just your typical elected politicians, right? So we know we can vote for senators, we can vote for representatives, we can vote for city council. In many places, you're voting for a DA and you're also voting for judges, right? Sometimes those are partisan elections, most of the time they're not. But those individuals are who's responsible for carrying out these laws, right? So engage with your local DA, and if you have local judges who are elected, engage with them to ask them where they stand on the criminalization of marijuana, right? Because law enforcement has to make a stop does not necessarily mean the DA has to charge that individual. It does not necessarily mean the judge has to take the case, right? So work at all levels of those that you can think of at the local level, and just ask them the simple question: where do you stand on the criminalization of marijuana? And let that inform how you can potentially get involved at the local level.
Took too long to unmute. Thank you. Thank you for that. And yes, my family is there, but washed up right now. We were in Homa. And so much love to anyone that is still there in New Orleans. That hurricane was no joke. So thank you for that. Dante, the same question for you, and then we'll sort of roundtable after that. But the same question for you in Missouri, and I know you've traveled and you've been in New York, and so what does policy look like locally right now? What are you seeing like on the ground?
Yeah, locally, I definitely seen the attitude change in policy, particularly in Kansas. Been working a lot with the chief counsel out there, and they're really taking a good view at it. I mean, the governor has been very outspoken on using cannabis funding to fund Medicaid, which is a big issue in the state of Kansas. So their eyes are opening with policy. They're still playing a little bit of politics, but I think these local district attorneys are really diving into what the governor is saying, and they're really realizing that it's a waste of money. That's the great thing about it. So they're trying to implement different resources to hopefully alleviate the over incarceration. They're also paying attention to, exactly what I had told them, like how much it affects a person having a felony and he didn't know. So they actually implemented, just firsthand on witness, they actually implemented a drug court in the county, the first ever drug court in my county. They said that they're going to see how it pans out, but hopefully it's a good drug court. I haven't really dove in all the way into the policy of the drug court, but they're implementing little by little, but they've decided to do that. So like I said before, things are changing. It just takes what people can make it change.
Right. And hopefully they execute that drug court the right way. I've seen it done wrong so many times. And so hopefully they are learning from the mistakes of others.
Exactly. Newark has a good drug court at that too. So hopefully they'll adopt that one.
Yeah, it always seems like a great idea until you don't read through. And then something else that Gracie has mentioned earlier that I wanted to highlight is that some of these great ideas and policies that are written, but then left up to the discretion of, right? And it is the same way in the prisons with the compassionate release or with even furloughs. It's like, yes, there's policy that says inmates have their rights to these policies, but it's left up to the warden, right? And so there's no follow through. And so the same thing with drug court, like follow through is the most important, the missing piece here. And so I'll start with you, Gracie, as I pose this question to everyone. What are some of the challenges that you have experienced with policy?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Evelyn. Yeah, just to build off of that point, I mean, one major challenge that we experience at LPP is momentum that kind of peters out after a really exciting bill passes, especially one as huge and exciting and historic as a big omnibus legalization bill. So while that can be a really amazing step that a state takes, it's all about implementation. That's what actually delivers relief to your door, right? That's what actually gets people out. That's what actually wipes their record, not the law being written down. The law has to be implemented. So a challenge that we experience is both a lack of education around the need for effective implementation and a lack of urgency and dare I say sexiness around it, because it's super exciting to pass a bill and get a ton of headlines, make the news and pass something awesome. But when it comes down to the years that it can often take to implement certain provisions, people get tired and they lose attention, right? And so a challenge that we have is making sure that people understand what has to be implemented when, and have them held to it in some way by officials and by the state. And I think another challenge that we experience that's kind of related to that loss of momentum or kind of education gap is that legalization is an industry focused effort, right? We're here for the people that were left behind. Legalization at its core is is a proactive effort. It's moving forward. It's creating a new market and creating something new, right? So we're looking back at everyone that was hurt and left behind. And sometimes that effort that LPP is doing can be kind of drowned out by the new market, by all of the hoopla around the regulations, by all of the money that's being made. That can sometimes be a louder voice than the people who are still locked down, right? So that can be a challenge because people are interested in the shiny object or the money to be made, and they don't really maybe understand or see the purpose or want to see that there's still a problem to be fixed. So those are just some of the challenges that we experience at the state level.
Good. And Natalie, some challenges that you have experienced?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we experience in policy, and I think everyone experiences both at LPP and then just sort of in their professional lives, is that a lot of this work really demands coalition building, and it demands relationship building, and it demands working with human beings. And just like myself and everyone else, while policy can seem really wonky, obviously people have different motivations for it, generally all really great, but different viewpoints, different perspectives, different levels of tolerance for ambiguity or efficiency and things like that. So making sure that those relationships are brokered in a really constructive and healthy and meaningful way is a constant challenge. And it's also one of the best parts of our job, of course. But, just like any other industry, advocacy organizations have different approaches to things. And that can oftentimes, lead to conflict that needs to be resolved or more specifically or more generally misunderstanding, because I think we all are aiming towards the same goals. A lot of times it's tactics and strategies that differ. So I would say that's one of our, our biggest challenges and something we're continuing to work on. It's not something that's ever going to go away. So I think as we just remember that not only are the people, the policies we're pushing, they're done in such a way that affects real people in a positive way. The people who are working on these are also real people with distinct needs and motivations and understanding as technical as can get, there's a real human element to everything that we do and everything that the advocacy community does more broadly.
I keep muting myself because I have to mute myself, guys, because I'm here going, yes. And I don't know how to internally mute that, so I have to hit the button. And so, Adrian, the same for you. What are some of the challenges that you have experienced with policy?
Sure, and totally echo what Gracie and Natalie just contributed. I think the sort of wrinkle out here is that this stuff is just hard. Like, it is difficult sometimes, right? Like we did a very high level overview of kind of like where LPP is engaging at the federal level and the state level and the local level, but all those things are not as directly linked as one might think they are, right? And sometimes there's a roller coaster of process in between each one of those levels that can make it very difficult to figure out where exactly is the need for change and who's responsible for making that. I think one of the benefits of that, though, and one of the sort of great things about our approach, right, is that because there are three separate on-ramps, there's three potential outcomes to affect a change that could ripple through that system, right? So I think that's one of the ones that I see as a challenge, but also a potential benefit. And, I think the other thing I would add there too is, the learning curve to figuring out how the overcriminalization of cannabis happened can be a little steep sometimes, right? Like there's a lot of silver dollar words that are thrown around that you have to just kind of become familiar with, like expungements and vacature and climate. Like it's a lot of new things to learn, right? But the great thing is that, once there's a level of familiarity, and I would encourage folks to visit our website, the policy advocacy portion of it, right, where we have some explainers to get as a good starting point to sort of familiarize yourself with these projects, right? But as you start to learn these things, you become more confident in your ability to call for change on them, right? Because you learn what am I supposed to be saying, and how do I ensure that my voice isn't just lost to the crowd, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that you started with, this is not easy work, right? If anyone is like me, there are still folks in my personal life that I have to convince that this plant is not harmful, it is not a drug, and that you shouldn't be in prison for, right? And so if we are still having to have those questions in our personal lives, it is just a reminder that prohibition did its job, right, very well in sort of really creating the stigma. And if these are the minds that I am having to interact with in my own circle daily, imagine having these conversations with folks who have reputations and careers on the line, right? As we're talking about decriminalizing this plant. And what that says for their career. So this is not easy work that we're doing here. And Natalie said, like, it is a team effort. It is mobilizing people. It is getting folks involved and reaching out to your own networks to get this job done. And as Natalie said, holding everyone accountable, right? Like making sure that once these laws are implemented, we're saying, hey, did you do it? California, you said it's not on your record anymore, but did you remove it, right? And so these are very important things. But before we get to Q&A, because the hour is approaching, as I knew it would, Dante, I do want to ask you, because you are so good with engaging, right? Like, I'm not a people's person. It's not my strong suit, but for you, it is, Dante. And so can you share some tips and tricks for engaging with folks in these policy discussions, especially with people who might not necessarily be empathetic? I imagine that conversation with that DA, right? You're not expecting the outcome that you get, but you have the nerve and the courage to say it out loud. And so how do you approach, and what are your tips and tricks when you are approaching these folks?
I think mostly this speak from the heart. One thing I'll mention, just before we move into that topic is, like, while I was incarcerated in Missouri, Missouri became medically legal, right? And that changed the whole perspective of Kansas. And if people are not familiar with Missouri and Kansas, they're literally 2 minutes from each other, and it's just, the state line is so close. But I believe, like, once we see these states next to this other state become legal and they see the benefits from it, they realize it, right? Because some people are like, we're not going to do what the West Coast is doing. But when they see states next to them do it, it makes them open their eyes a little bit more. But these tips, that the first thing I always hit somebody with, depending on the situation and depending on the conversation and the person, is, I think everybody can relate. And I know, Evelyn, you can understand this. You're a co-defendant to a person that was serving life. But should a person die in prison for marijuana? 9 out of 10 of people are going to say no. If they're passionate about it, if they know anything about the knowledge of cannabis, they're going to be like, no. And a lot of people, when you teach them that there is people serving life, there's people serving a significant amount of time, they're looking at it at like a wow factor. Wow, like, I didn't know those policies were that low. I didn't know people were serving that much time. And that kind of drives people to act, but people don't know what exactly where to act at, right? And I think that's where LPP comes in and helps them and gives them that guidance, man, because it's like, when you have these engaging, meaningful conversations with people that are not well educated on policy in their own region, then it makes them realize when voting comes around, or at that moment, because, you hit someone deep when you say someone is serving 40 years, or someone just got out for serving 30 years for cannabis, or someone is serving life and they're subject to not come home. It makes people really think, like, where's our justice system at? And it's definitely not even, right? So that's how I engage the conversation, by just kind of being real empathetic, and you're not inclined to listen to me, nor my story. People may not get passionate about my story, or even your story, Evelyn, or anybody's, right? But people have to really, if you believe in equality, you believe in justice, it's not about me, nor it's about the masses, right? Don't feel sorry for me, feel sorry for the story that's not told. You know what I mean? And I think when people understand that, they're like, wow, you may not relate to the elements of mine, but somebody may come out and walk kind of a similar life as you, and you may relate to them, but we happen to be we happen to have the opportunity to be the voice, for the people that don't have that voice in there. So, we kind of just engage. You just engage. I engage with a starting question, and I engage with just having a serious conversation. Because if you come at somebody respectful and knowledgeable on a certain topic, then they're willing to listen, you know, especially if you gain their interest in the first couple minutes.
I think you're right. I've said it many times. I've started many conversations with that. Did you know that? And at the time, it was always Corvain Cooper serving life or prison. Because, like you said, most folks don't, and most folks on any level can understand the difference between living and not living, right? And then not living because of this plant definitely reaches a core and opens a conversation. So I don't know. I feel like we should make that something like a post. Like, did you know, folks, we're serving life sentences for this? And ask someone, right? Like, ask someone today, did you know that folks are still serving life in prison for cannabis?
Literally Fact Friday, right? Fact Friday. Dude, you know someone was serving life in prison for cannabis right now.
Right now in 2021.
Learn more. Learn more. Boom, boom, boom.
So this has become a marketing strategy webinar, but I think it's awesome, and I think that for me, I've learned a lot in this session. I do not have any Q&A in the box, so this is a good time if you have anything. But I understand why there would be no questions. I think we've covered so much in such a short period of time. I am in a position to have conversations like these live often, and I'm learning that regardless of the audience, I am coming to learn, and so I learned so much from you for today, so thank you so much. And as we wrap, and I'll give 2 minutes, but during the 2 minutes, if any questions pop up, we'll answer them. But as we wrap, I'll go around, is there any last words or anything that you would like to get off your chest that we did not? Natalie?
So one thing I want to stress is we keep talking about the need to sort of talk to your elected officials and make your voice heard. But I think obviously there's a benefit in terms of policy outcomes, but it's also just really personally fulfilling to know that you're playing a role and you're civically engaged and you're able to make change that way. Like, I was very nervous my first few meetings with elected officials. I sort of thought they were on a pedestal and I would sound dumb or ill-informed. A lot of times, by virtue of what their role is, they may not know this is an issue, or they might not know that other people care about this issue. And you may be coming to the table with a lot more information than them or their staff have. So you're doing the community a real service and just educating folks, let alone advancing the policies that we know to be just and necessary.
Yes. And back to your published letter. What are we calling that? Publish your letter to the editor. Maybe the title, everyone, is, did you know that folks are still in prison for cannabis, right? Like, I think
I love it.
We're just gonna put it all together.
All right, everyone check your calendars. Everyone from LPP, we're gonna have a kickoff meeting early next week.
Yes, we're gonna do that for your letters to the editors. And Gracie, any last words?
Yeah, I think, if you're so inclined to visit your local dispensary, if you're lucky enough to live in a state that has them, ask that dispensary if they're familiar with LPP. Hopefully they are, but, start a conversation with your bud tender or, the shop's owner if they're around, and see if they're engaged with us, because it's a really great place to talk to people about the policies that are affecting people in your neighborhood, in your community, right? So a lot of those dispensaries are in places where people are still walking around outside with a cannabis record on their back still. So it's a really great place to start a conversation with people who have resources and connections to people who might be able to change those policies.
Right. And if you all don't know what a cannabis conviction feels like on your jacket, I recently went to sign up to volunteer at my 7th grade daughter's school to serve lunches. And for that, I will need to be fingerprinted. And because of that, I needed to disclose to the principal, hey, I have an old cannabis conviction but the embarrassment or the shame and the stigma that comes around even having to, educate your daughter's principal about your federal conviction is something that we need to work on. And so, yes, please have those conversations. Those felonies, as much as I am happy to be out of prison, you think that that is it, but that having that on your jacket and wearing that definitely causes ripple effects. And so, Adrian, any last minute words from you?
Just really want to thank you, Evelyn, for hosting this panel and bringing us together. Really appreciate it. And for everyone who joined us on a Friday. And yeah, just another reminder that, you know, justice isn't done simply in the doing of legalizing, it's in the undoing of the harm. And that looks different in a lot of different states, but the goal is still the same, right? To undo the harm caused by the overcriminalization of cannabis.
Yes, yes, that was another tagline. I love it. They're coming. And then Dante, we appreciate your apologies for the poor Wi-Fi. I see that in the chat. But do you have any last words that you would like to share?
Yeah, just let's continue. I think we're all on the same mission here on state to state. You know, and people, one thing I could comment on is someone asked me, what LPP gonna do when everybody's out of prison? And I said, well, we're gonna go around the world and get them out. So that's my attitude on it, and I hope you guys are on board with it too. There's still people locked up in Asia. I would ask.
I'm gonna retire. I'm gonna be honest. I mean, like, and good night. And I say that so truthfully. I thought that at the release of Corbin Cooper, I would be done, right? I really did. And the truth is, there were 40,000 people. Now there's 39,999, and there's no way I continue to operate in the free world and not think about those who are not able, right? And so, yes, I'm looking to put us out of business, and then Dante will go to China. I don't know. One thing at a time for me, but I will thank you all so much for attending. I will leave you with this. Please visit lastprisonerproject.org. Sign up for our newsletters. You will get invites to these webinars and these sessions. Please sign our petitions. Signatures go a long way. It's really like, that is how loud your microphone is. If you've got 2 signatures, your volume is turned down really low. If you've got 1 million, you've turned the volume up a little bit. So please be a part of us turning up the volume on these issues. And so I thank you and I appreciate you. And this recording will be available on our YouTube space. And I return your Friday to you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.